Hello, I'm David A. Elliott. I just wanted to give you an update on Warren McCorriston, who pleaded guilty to a number of charges in Newcastle Court on the 16th of December 2020. That's 3 days before this recording. You may recall that late last year, Warren McCorriston became a person of interest in the disappearances of teenage girls and young women from the late 1970s to the early 1990s. At the time, he was also charged with several sexual assaults, common assaults, and detaining for advantage and various other associated offences in relation to teenage girls and young women from the same time period. Many of these offences occurred in Newcastle suburbs and Gosford. I became aware of his appearance in Newcastle Local Court on the 16th of December when I was watching the local television news in Newcastle that night on NBN television. They briefly mentioned that he had pleaded guilty to 10 of the charges and would appear in court in February for sentencing. Now, I was aware there were a lot more charges than that, so I looked into it a bit further. I found a brief mention on the Daily Telegraph newspaper website which stated, "The former Belmont man has pleaded guilty to charges of sexual and common assault, while 18 charges have been withdrawn." On the basis that he pleaded to 10 charges and 18 were withdrawn, that makes a total of 28 charges. And this was confirmed when I went to the full article, which said that he was facing 28 serious charges relating to the alleged assaults and rape of 3 women in the Hunter between 1980 and 1999. Now, there's a bit of a discrepancy in those dates, but the previous figures I provided are more accurate. The article then goes on to say, in Newcastle Local Court on Wednesday, McCorriston's solicitor said his client was pleading guilty to 5 charges which involved all 3 women. So, what happened to the 10? That's a question. What about the other 5? I'll get on to that later. They include inflict actual bodily harm with intent to have sexual intercourse with a victim, sexual assault, inflict actual bodily harm, sexual assault knowing no consent given, maliciously inflict actual bodily harm, and common assault. Then goes on to talk about the charges that were dropped. A charge of detain for advantage when police allege McCorriston abducted a 10-year-old girl from her mother in 1979 at Blacksmiths has been dropped. 17 other charges were also dismissed. Then lists the nature of these charges. So these are the ones that were dismissed, including sexual assault, attempt to choke and strangle a victim, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, and common assault. The facts are still being disputed and the matters have been committed to sentence in the District Court in February. And just briefly at the end of the article, because it does talk about how there were these other missing girls, it says, there is no suggestion McCorriston had anything to do with the disappearance of any of the 3 women. Now, I think they're just putting that last sentence there to protect themselves, because technically, yep, you can't suggest that he had anything to do with those disappearances. I mean, the reality was he was a person of interest for the police when they found out about these historical sexual assault charges. Whether or not he is still a person of interest, to the police, I do not know. But at the very least, you'd think he'd be added to the list of persons of interest. I mean, there were about half a dozen others, so could be one of them, could be him, could even be someone not even on police radar. We may never know. Anyway, as I mentioned, there were 28 charges in total. 18 were withdrawn. This article I just read said he pleaded guilty to 5, but it does not mention what happened with the other 5 charges. So, bit of an issue there. However, I did do a bit more research, and on Twitter I found a tweet by an ABC journalist by the name of Giselle Wakatama. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She put the tweet on the 16th of December, which was the day he appeared in court. She tweeted, "Several cold case rapes that have baffled detectives for decades have been solved, with a man pleading guilty to raping several women near Newcastle. Warren John McCorriston pleaded guilty to 10 charges, 5 to be taken into account on sentence." Now, that got me curious. Okay, the Daily Telegraph said he pleaded guilty to 5. NBN News and Giselle said that he pleaded guilty to 10 of the charges. However, she says 5 are to be taken into account. So maybe this is where the discrepancy has happened. Now, I wasn't sure what 5 taken into account meant. And I'm no legal expert, so I did a bit of research online and found a document called the Sentencing Bench Book. And it had a fairly comprehensive explanation of what that meant. From my understanding of what I read, it seems that if someone pleads guilty to a lesser offence that they've been found guilty of for a more significant offence, then the person charged can request that their pleading guilty to those lesser offences be taken into account when they are sentenced for the primary offence. In other words, they could get a discount on the sentence for the more primary offence since they have pleaded guilty to these other offences. However, it is not black and white that the court has to do that. The person who is being convicted can make that request, but it is then up to the court to decide whether to take that into account. For example, they need to look at the whole situation and at such things as whether they consider the person has a possibility of rehabilitation and various other factors. So even though that request has been made, it could be ignored and he could get the full force of the sentence for those more serious offences. From that reading, I am thinking maybe what has happened, he has not contested 5 of those charges, possibly because the evidence is too strong and it is likely that he would be convicted of those offences. But with the other 5, he may have pleaded guilty to those and has requested that those 5 be taken into account in the sentencing that is given for these other 5. That is just my opinion. I don't know that as a fact. But I think that could probably be the case. Now, this is just my opinion, but I sort of feel it's a bit more reinforced when I went back and looked at an article in the Newcastle Herald on the 23rd of July 2020. In this article, it says the DPP, so in other words the prosecutor, withdrew 5 charges on Wednesday, and the matter was adjourned until September, with the parties expected to hold a conference next month to discuss the charges. Okay, so at that court appearance, 5 of the charges were dropped, and a bit earlier in that article it does say that there were now 23 sexual assault and other charges. So in total there were 28, but as can be seen by this, 5 had already been dropped in July. Anyway, getting back to what I thought was interesting was it said the parties will have a conference to discuss the matters. So I'm assuming the parties would be the prosecutor and the defence's solicitor, and possibly the defendant, Warren McCorriston. But the key legal people, obviously, will get together, discuss all the charges, the evidence, and I dare say they're looking at, okay, what are the prospects of conviction based on this? The prosecutors probably agreed, okay, we'll drop all these charges because there's not really enough evidence that they're likely to go ahead in court. Then they looked at the remaining 10. Okay, 5, they're pretty convinced, yep, nah, that'll go through. The other 5, yeah, maybe. And yeah, so they've probably gone, okay, well, you plead guilty to the lot. These 10, we'll drop the others. And yeah, you can also put in a request that the 5 main ones, reduce those because you pleaded guilty to the others, and good luck with that. That's just my surmising. I don't know that's what really happened, but just an educated guess from what I've read. Anyway, we'll see what happens in February and I'll update you then. So remember, if you like my videos, please subscribe, and you know what to do. Subscribe, click the bell for notifications and all that sort of jazz. I'm David A. Elliott. Have a good one and see you around like a Giselle.